Let's create this 3D map with 3D lines connecting countries and its camera move panning left to right. The first thing we need to do is get a map. So I've downloaded a vector of a map here, placed it into its own composition, which is 1920 by 1080. So we will drag that map into its own composition, make that a 3D layer, and we'll add a camera to the scene. One node camera, 50mm standard settings, I don't really play with those. Select the camera and parent it to a null. The reason I do this, if we go to the left view, is this null, once we make it 3D, can now rotate around the center of our scene, as opposed to the camera rotating from further outside. So if we go to our active camera, select the map and rotate this around the x-axis -90. This will lay it flat, pointing upwards. And now if we go back to the left view, we can see that our camera is pointing at the scene and our map is laying flat. If we take this null, rotate it around the X, and bring the camera, pressing P on the keyboard, this position will now bring the camera forwards and backwards closer to the scene. So go back to our active camera and we can play with this and go closer or further away from the map. We want to add rotation properties to this null on the y-axis, starting off with say -15 and ending with +15. So this just gives us a nice slow rotation around our map. Next is where we add the connections. So I'm going to make a new composition and bring up the guides using the proportional grid. So if I make a path in a curve like this, I want to try and keep them symmetrical. And all we want is the path data for this. So we'll go down to Contents, Shape, Path, click on this and copy that. Go back to our map scene, rename it map scene so that we know what composition we're in. And we will add a new solid to this layer. Call it connection 1. And obviously it's just going to come up as a big dark solid. And if we start to draw a mask on this, click M on the keyboard and paste our mask onto this property. So now we've got a layer that has this shape on it. Now we'll use the stroke effect and drag that onto the layer. I also use FX Console from Video Copilot as an easy way to access these effects. I can post a link in the description for that. So that's Control space to bring up FX Console, stroke and enter. So this puts the stroke effect onto our layer. We want to choose on transparent, and now there'll be this stroke as a 3D layer. We can see that it's clipping through the map. So I'm going to go to our front view and maybe turn the camera off so that it's not distracting us. We want to line up this path with the bottom of the map. So you can see the maps here right through the center of our composition. So we can use that line to line up our connections. I'm going to press Y on the keyboard to bring up the pan behind tool and move the anchor point down to one of the sides and bring this close down to the map. I'm not going to have it cut through the bottom, I'm going to leave the end of this stroke above the map. And now we can add, if I go to 10 frames, add a keyframe on the end property of this stroke, just trim that layer in. Go for 20 frames, add another keyframe, and bring the first keyframe down to 0, and just easy ease those in, F9. Now we have one of the connections being made, and if we go to our active camera and turn that back on, we can see that it's kind of in 3D space. If we go to the rotation of the null and maybe make these more extreme, so from -35 to +35, now we can see a lot more of an extreme move round, but our connection still looks a bit 2D and it becomes flat in these sections here. You can see that's not a proper edge. And if we just turn on this continuously rasterize button, it will snap the connection back into an actual 3D object. So now you can see that taking shape. I like to go to the top view and use the anchor point to set where this connection is going to start. And you can use these parameters to place your connection where you want to start. And then using the Y rotation, you can see where the end of it's going to be because it's the end of our mask. So you can rotate that, and say I want it to go to Australia, I will just use the scale property, increase that using the rotation and the scale. So now it's just a case of setting up where you want all these connections to come from. So I'm going to use this same point of origin, duplicate this, offset the timing a bit, and then rotate this again so that it goes over to a different continent. Using the scale again to bring that down. The stroke width doesn't change when the scale changes because that's an effect added, and the continuously rasterize button means that it won't change with the scale. So now we have our map rotating and our two connections coming out of it. And you can keep building them up and up. I have a layer that I've created called grid, which I can bring into the scene as a background. If I make it a 3D layer, holding shift, parent it to the map layer, now it's on the same plane as the map and acts as the background. And that's one way to utilize this kind of fake 3D look. You can also add in location markers. So I've got a version here where we have a pre-comp of a marker just animating up. This isn't 3D, but then once you bring it into the scene and make that layer 3D, all of these have transform, auto orient, orient towards camera. And I can show you an example of adding another one. You bring the marker into the scene, make it 3D, and then if you go to the front view, we can line up, pressing Y on the keyboard, change the anchor point to the bottom of the marker, and bring the marker, press V on the keyboard, bring it up so that it's in line with the bottom of the map. Scale that down. And you can see that these other markers are at a funny angle, and that's because they're all aiming towards the camera. So I'm going to right click, transform, auto orient, orient towards camera. That's going to give this one the same look. Go back to the active camera, and that's part of the scene now. If you want to change where that is in the scene, you can go to the top view, select the marker, and holding Control on the keyboard, you move the marker but along the same plane. If you try and use these arrows, because it's rotated, you're going to end up going through the map and like all kinds of issues. So if you hold Control and move, it will stay on the same plane, which is this map plane. So I think we'll place that over here, scale it down a little bit more, and there we have it. Like and subscribe if you think this has helped you, and leave a comment if you have any questions. Thanks.